House of David episode 3 is a really great episode overall, with the anointing of David and everything that happens there on that side. But today I wanted to flip the script and talk about Orpah specifically. We have the king of Gath, Achish, who is now on the lookout for some way to help unite his people and to win this war against the Israelites, essentially. They're trying to find some sort of weapon to do that with, right? In this episode here, we get to see as Achish goes to the valley of the Rephaim, and that is the valley of the giants, and we see him as he pursues what is happening here overall. Let's jump into this.
My father told me many stories of giants as a boy. He told me they lived in a great valley. I wish he was here to see this.
We should keep moving. I have horses waiting down below.
So you see this big valley that's here. First part of our deep dive is that this valley is a real place. The valley of the Rephaim, or the valley of giants, is a real place within Israel. It's actually kind of northwest all the way to southwest of Jerusalem. It kind of runs in a diagonal line on the west side of Jerusalem overall. So depending on where they are in this, they could be anywhere within that valley overall. But we see them as they kind of venture forth into this this forested area. Probably way less trees in Israel. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of trees and wood in Israel. It's mostly rocks. And you see them here jumping into the valley of giants, the valley of Rephaim. So we jump in here. We see that he approaches, and they see this massive wall of skulls. This is quite interesting. This is just obviously to show fear within the show. It's not necessarily a historical thing. It's not something that we actually would see in Israel overall. But Achish makes the comment that this is the fear that we seek. He's looking at this massive mound of skulls, which is human skulls that they've accumulated over the period of time that people have tried to come and look for the giants. And Achish is like, this is what we want. This is the fear that we seek. This is the thing that we want people to be afraid of us with, right? And so that is what he's using here.
Onward.
Yes, my king.
Now we see his followers kind of follow along. You can see all the work that probably went into into that giant mound of skulls as well. All of these sets are really, really well done. I think in House of David, they did a really great job. Now they go through the mountain pass here, and they end up looking at this giant rock face, and it looks towards a giant door. Now, obviously, this is not a real location. This is kind of a made-up version of where Goliath could have come from. In scriptures, it really seems like Goliath just comes from Gath. Like he's just part of Gath, and he comes from that city. It doesn't really show them going to get Goliath from anywhere else. And so this is obviously a made up portion of this in order to make it for the story for the show overall. Now, as he approaches, his men are kind of wary, but he does knock on the door here and gets an answer.
Prince of the Philistine Empire.
And he says who he is. He says he's Achish of Gath, king of the Philistines, basically.
I have come to seek an audience with the Anakim who walk among us.
Now, we've talked about this word before, but the Anakim, these are the giants, the sons of Anak, is what that kind of means there. And he says, we've come to basically befriend the Anakim, and the person who's talking on the inside in this subtitle, they're called the gatekeeper. We know this is Orpah, but the gatekeeper says Gath was no friend of Anak, and so she's bringing it back to the beginning. This is what a lot of people would do during this time. Is like, for example, the Edomites and the Israelites. A lot of people, they would not be friends, right, within those two groups generally. Now we see exceptions to this. For example, Doeg is part of Saul's court, and he is an Edomite. So we see exceptions to this, but generally we would see that the Edomites are not friends with the Israelites, because the Edomites come from Esau and the Israelites come from Jacob, also known as Israel. And so kind of taking it back to then, we see that there is a separation that happens there, and they're not friends. And so the people that they have as descendants are not friends either. And so we see this obviously happening a lot here. Even in this moment here, she's referencing that as well.
God was no friend of Anak.
Yet I wish to be friends of yours. May I enter?
Many enter, none return.
Again, we don't really get any of this in scripture, although I do like some of the things that are kind of up on this this section here. We see some of the different things that are happening. For example, we see this kind of horned face bust, I guess you could call it, that's on the side of the doorway here and here as well. I wonder if these were real things that were there, or if we're looking at CGI here. I'm not 100% sure. My guess is that most of this is in camera, like it's an actual set piece that they made or have there, and so we see kind of this stone figure over the side. Again, I don't think this is referencing a very specific thing, although I could be wrong about that. Let me know in the comments if you do recognize this from anywhere else. But these obviously are they're kind of conjuring fear. They're conjuring, hey, don't enter here, essentially.
The peace of my house depends on it. Do you still request this?
Now, this is a lot of foreshadowing as well. I'm going over the dialogue here. Orpah, from inside the walls, she says, whoever enters here, they do not exit, essentially. Anybody that comes here is going to be killed. The peace of my household depends on it. And she doesn't realize yet, we're going to get to this in later episodes, clearly, but she doesn't realize that this is very much the case. In fact, Akish is probably the first person that they've ever let leave here alive. And because they did that, there's a pretty big problem here. And because they did that, it's going to lead to the ruin of her and her family, essentially. And so we're going to see that kind of play out in real time.
Yes.
Enter, Lord of God, you and no other.
So here we see the doors open. This is, it looks really CG to me. It looks computer generated to me here. I'm not 100% sure, but that's kind of what it looks like. I do wonder now, especially since we've talked about this before with the AI used in episode 6, which we're getting closer to. I do wonder here if there's some AI going on here, like we talked about in that episode. So I wonder if maybe some of this stuff up here, or some of these things that are kind of added in, maybe they're blurred out because they were AI generated, and so they're trying to focus you on the center of the screen. It doesn't really look to me, at least to my eye right here, that these are real large doors that are being really opened, although it could be. You also have the smoke that's kind of coming out from the bottom of the door here, obviously looking very menacing and intimidating. My thought is like, what sort of button did Orpah use to open these doors? I get it's supposed to be sort of like an ominous thing, right? These doors open by themselves and then you walk in alone. I get that. So putting that aside for a second, I just think it's funny to think about, like, Orpah has set up some sort of elaborate pulley mechanism in order to open the doors from a far distance away. I just think it's funny, but
No, my king.
And so we have Akish going into Orpah's lair here as we continue on with the episode. Then later on in the episode, we get kind of a more of a conclusion to what is happening here with him as he goes into the lair itself, and he meets with Orpah for the first time, as we see played out here.
How did you find this place?
Your kind leave deep footprints.
So he's saying they just tracked them here. How did you find this place? We just tracked the really large footprints that we know about.
My seers tell me you are called Orpah.
My seers tell me you are called Orpah. We'll get into who Orpah is and why she's important. We've talked about this a little bit, but there's definitely some deeper things happening here.
I am.
Which in the old tongue is Mother of Giants.
No one speaks in the old tongue. It was buried long ago.
Now, this is kind of an interesting historical piece. I don't think that Orpah actually means Mother of Giants. I think they're just using that for the show. However, clearly Orpah is very old here. Orpah would be, I mean, she would be very old. We don't know exactly how old she would be, but she would definitely be way, way up there, like an unnaturally long lifespan sort of thing. Remember who Orpah is, right? We can jump over to this scripture here in order to talk about it. Real quick before we get to that, I wanted to let you guys know that we just released a brand new merch drop over on our store. You can check that out in the link in the description down below, or go to snipelifeshop.com. We're calling this our Biblical Moments Collection. We have Mary Magdalene at the tomb, communion, water to wine, and of course, the multiplication. These are some awesome designs that I hope you guys love, and go ahead and check them out at the store. You can get them at any time. But Ruth is the book which we know Orpah from, okay? And so if we read here in verse 3, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there for about 10 years. So we can see that the husband of Naomi dies, okay? She's left with her 2 sons. And remember, in that world during that time, if a woman's husband dies, and she doesn't have anybody to take care of her, she's basically destitute. It's not very good, right? So she has her 2 sons, and her 2 sons basically take care of her and the family. So she's okay. She doesn't need to remarry immediately. She doesn't need to, have another husband. She has her 2 sons that are ready to take care of her. And then they take on wives named Orpah and Ruth. So now it's a family of 5. And both Mahlon and Chilion, her sons, died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So now she's really destitute. She is really, really having a rough time here. She does not have anybody to care for her. She doesn't have anybody to provide for the family. She, like, everything that she would need in that circumstance is now taken away from her. So it's not looking good for Naomi, okay? Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So they were going to leave Moab and go back to the land of Judah, which is where Naomi is from. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me." So Naomi is allowing her daughters to leave. They have no more moral contract to deal with Naomi anymore. They were married to her sons. Her sons are now dead. So now they can leave Naomi alone and go back to Moab, go back to their home, and allow Naomi to go back to Judah by herself. Now, this would be very, very difficult for Naomi. Naomi would have to figure out how to live, and everything else would be very, very, very hard for her on her own. And so here's what happens after that. We see that Naomi says, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands?" Like she's basically saying, I have no more sons for you to take. Even if you wanted to stay with me, you can't. There's nothing that could connect us anymore. We're no longer family, right? Just go back. There's nothing that you can do. Then they lifted their voices and they wept again. Verse 14 here. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. What does this mean? Orpah kissing her mother-in-law is literally like that phrase, "I kissed you goodbye," okay? And so she kissed Naomi goodbye and said, okay, I'm going to go back to my roots. I'm going to go back to Moab, but Ruth clung to her. Okay, verse 15. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." So she denounces Moab. Not only Moab itself, but she denounces the gods of Moab, which is a really, really big deal for Ruth. It means that everything that she's known growing up no longer matters, because she's fixated on helping Naomi and serving Yahweh now. Remember, she's been with Naomi for over a decade at this point. And so it's not like she hasn't known who Yahweh is. She's been learning that over the years. And this is why Ruth becomes such a powerful figure in the Old Testament and is eventually a part of the line of David and in turn, the part of the line of Jesus, right? because Ruth had this faith that allowed her to follow Naomi and then eventually meet Boaz and all of that kind of stuff that happens in the book of Ruth. Now, why is this really interesting when we talk about Orpah overall? Number one, like we said, Orpah is super old. Okay. She would be the great, basically Ruth is David's great grandmother. And so it's a long, a long time away, right? A great grandmother. How many of you really had a close relationship with your great grandparents, right? You've probably met them. You probably hung out with them. You probably had some sort of relationship with them. Most of you, at least met them at some point, right? But having a long-term relationship to where David would be, in his teens at some point during this time, and imagine Ruth and Boaz still being alive during that point. It would be pretty crazy, especially during the time of David. So Orpah obviously has some sort of longevity, at least in this show, that is maybe supernatural to some extent, right? We're seeing that here. Now we see a little bit of a conversation of Orpah and Achish here as they kind of go through different areas, and they're talking about the sons of Anak. They're talking about her sons and what that looks like, and they're kind of mentioning them as almost demigod-like characters. This is really interesting here. Now let's get to this last portion here, and then we'll jump into a little bit deeper understanding about what is going on with Ruth and Orpah and David, and how this all fits together, and how they're kind of what their purpose is in this whole section here.
Behold the greatest of my sons.
So here we see as Achish looks up, she says, "Behold the greatest of my sons," and we get Goliath there at the very end of the episode here. Now I want to jump back so we can see a little bit more of Orpah herself, but in this section I want to talk a little bit about who Orpah is compared to Ruth, because I think that the Bible does this quite a lot when it comes to talking about archetypal characters. So talking about David or Jesus or Satan or Orpah and Ruth. All of these things they carry along with them, of course, the character of who they are. Jesus is unique in his character and who he is and what he does, but also there's an archetype that is within each of them, right? Jesus obviously being the most special within that, but with David, we see him as a king and as a musician and as someone who loves equally as he fights, right? We see in this story a juxtaposition between Ruth and Orpah. Even though Ruth is not mentioned pretty much at all in this whole section here, we get the understanding that Orpah is kind of the opposite of what Ruth is. Ruth stayed with Naomi. She chose Yahweh over the Moab gods. She stayed with Naomi and was faithful to her and helped her through the bad situation. Whereas Orpah kissed her goodbye. She left Naomi. She went back to the gods of Moab and the people of Moab. And because of that, after she was married to Naomi's son, in this story at least, then she actually, became part of the line of the sons of Anak at some point there and slept with, either this is insinuating that she slept with an angel, a fallen angel, or that she slept with a giant at some point and then had more giant babies. So it's really hard to say. I don't think it's insinuating that she slept with a fallen angel, because that would have happened like way long ago, like before the time of Noah and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a little bit strange. We'll get way more into that in episode 6, by the way, when we get to talk about the book of Enoch and some different things there. Not the book of Enoch, but the book of Enoch. A little bit close there. But we see Orpah kind of being the opposite of a Ruth, right? But then that puts into perspective what we get from everything else. If Ruth clings to Yahweh and she clings to Naomi, and Orpah rejects Naomi and goes back to the gods of Moab, if Ruth, faces uncertainty and she fights towards Judah in order to, follow God and be obedient to him, while Orpah kind of chooses her cultural and ancestral kind of security of what she's used to, then if Ruth, becomes the line of David and Orpah becomes the line of Goliath, then everything is kind of a parallel all throughout, right? It's not just the decisions that Ruth and Orpah made during their lifetime, but it's also the ancestral kind of like lineages that they leave for each other. So Orpah, her lineage is not just the lineage of Goliath. It's not just the lineage of the enemies of Israel. But on top of this, right, not only is she a Canaanite, not only is she the mother of Goliath, but she represents as a whole her being the seed of Satan, right? We can take it all the way back to the garden, because we can see that Adam was the seed of God, right? And even though he falls in the garden, there becomes eventually a seed of Adam and a seed of Satan within the world. Jesus even talks about this in the book of John. It's one of the most harsh things that he ever says to people. He says that they are sons of Satan. What does he mean by that? Well, there's a lineage that happens throughout all of the world, right? There are sons of God and there are sons of Satan. And so this is a parallel to that we're seeing here. We're seeing David, who is a son of God, someone who chooses God and is obedient to him, not perfectly, but he is obedient to him, and he's walking in that, and he wants to serve God. And then on the other hand, we're seeing Goliath, who wants to destroy the Israelites, who feeds off of being a son of the enemy. And so there's a parallel there, even down to the armor that Goliath wears. Goliath wears an armor that is covered in scales, right? What does that remind you of? It's a connection there back to the snake. I think that's on purpose. I think biblically that's on purpose as well. I love those type of connections. And so in this story, as we have Orpah here, I think it makes a lot of sense that Orpah would be an offset parallel to Ruth. And so it's a really unique kind of thing there that they would do that. Now, I think there's probably more to this than what they're showing right here. And I don't know if we're going to get into the whole Ruth and Boaz storyline at some point within the house of David. I would like to see where that goes or what happens there. We don't really get a lot of talk of Boaz and Ruth, although it does reference them a little bit. Kind of Jesse being the son of Obed. And then, of course, that connects him to Boaz and Ruth. But yeah, not too much coming from there overall. But yeah, I really, really love this section. I think having Orpah here is really interesting because Orpah is it's such a weird character. Like, we don't really think about her as a biblical character too often because she had such a small part in the beginning of the book of Ruth. But her being here is really interesting. And some of this stuff comes from Jewish tradition where she's connected to the giants and so on and so forth. But in the show, I think it's well done. Definitely. We'll get into the future of what happens to her and everything else within this first season in just a little bit. But of course, let me know your thoughts on this whole section here. What do you think of Orpah? Do you think that she is well written in this? Do you think that she should be here in this portion, or should it have been something else? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.